Thank you so much for having us here today, and thank you to the amazing homeowners that have shared this. So obviously retrofitting your existing home is a really interesting topic for so many people, because we buy what we buy when we've got a house, and then we have the challenge of trying to incorporate all this sustainable solutions into our home. So I'm Rebeka from BuildHer Collective. So we help women build and renovate, and we run a building course to do that. So if you want to find out more about that, you can. And today we have 4 people. So we've got Dion from Russellvale Reno, Georgia and Greg's house, Bell House and Forbode House, and each of these is a really exciting use of taking an existing home and adding sustainable elements to it and making them function a lot better in terms of light and efficiency and energy. So I'm going to introduce Dion first up from Russellvale Reno. If you can take us through your home. Oh, we need the sound.
There we go.
There we go. Dion and Amy, sorry.
I think along the way, I think my name was mentioned, and only, but yeah, it's Dion and Amy as well. So we've both been partners in this one all the way through. So our home, we bought this home in 2013. It was an old, fairly decrepit weatherboard home, but straight away we loved the block of land that it was on. It was a nice wide block and gave us what we wanted in terms of being able to keep an eye on the kids as they're out playing in the backyard. We can do our veggie garden how we want it. We come from a very steep block, which was not very practical for a couple of really small kids. And when we got the builder's report done, they said, look, the house has got good bones, which meant there was a good hardwood frame. So we always knew that we would keep the house as much as we could. So it was never going to be a knockdown rebuild. We didn't know how we would then do the renovation. But it ended up, after we sort of lived in it for 18 months or so and just got a feel for what it was like on when it was hot, when it was cold, when it was windy, when it was rainy. And then we went and started looking for architects, and then we met up with Envirotecture. We had our ideas, and then they educated us in better ways of doing things. And the brief was, look, yeah, we want to let in as much sun as we can, warm it as naturally as we can, make it warmer, and then make it not so hot in the summer, and being Wollongong, which is not too hot, not too cold. We didn't really have to go too overboard with any of the requirements, but there's still quite a decent level of insulation that's been put through the entire home, not just the new part, but also quite substantially in the old part of the house. So in all the external walls, in the ceiling, under the floor, everywhere, and that made a big difference as well. Now it's just a lovely, comfortable home to live in.
So did you set a budget with them for the extension and for the sustainable features separately, or was that all part of the one brief?
Well, it was all pretty much, the brief was, we were after a home that included the extension as well. We didn't really budget in and say, oh, here's what we pay for sustainable features. The expectation was when it was going to get designed, it would have sustainability in mind. And that's the brief that we had when we talked to different architects. We said, oh, we want a sustainable home, as passive as possible. And they said, oh, okay. And some you could tell probably didn't know how to do it right. And then, but straight away talking to Dick Clark, they knew straight away what we're after. So the budget in the end was to cover everything.
Okay, perfect. Did you have, I'll ask one more question before I'll move on to the intro of the next person, but did you have much of a, much pushback when you were asking for sustainable features from architects? You said that some people didn't know what you were talking about. So did you have to search far to find that?
No, some of them, someone say, oh yeah, we covered that in university, or so you could tell some of them didn't actively do sustainable features. They would just do, if someone said, look, I want a big house and faces west and has air conditioning, whatever, that's what they do for people. Whereas when we said, here's what we all want the house to do, the guys from Envirotecture knew how to make that happen for the house. So there was, so for some architects, they didn't seem, and drafts people as well. We talked to a range of people because there's different budgets from an architect through to a drafts person. And some of them they didn't even come back with a quote to do a concept phase, because you could tell that they were probably out of their depth. So we didn't even hear back from them.
Wonderful. All right, thank you. We'll come back to you. Thank you for the brief overview. So next we've got Georgia and Greg's house, and Peter Overton's going to take us through this. Just a quick reminder, if you've got any questions, there's a Q&A box. So jump into the Q&A box for any questions and we'll try and get to them for the homeowners. There is an opportunity to touch base with the homeowners through the Sustainable House Day portal and ask them further questions, but any that you can put in here would be appreciated. And the chat box is for just covering off general comments. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yes, hi Rebecca. This house is located in one of the older suburbs in the ACT, Canberra. Yarralumla has in the past been a site for many original timber-clad workers' cottages. They were originally put there for the workers who manned the brickworks that supplied a lot of the bricks for the earlier Canberra buildings. So the owners here were very keen to address some problems that they'd had for the house. They've had the house for, I think, over 10 years, and there were some ongoing glitches that were prevalent with the house. But the major issues for it were that the living spaces themselves were way too small. And because of some issues with previous extensions that have been made to the house, the access to the garden spaces and ingress of light and solar heat were very limited. So it was also suffering from quite a bit of overshadowing from neighbouring buildings. So the main challenge that we faced as designers for the extension and the refit to the house were to try and address those points relating to the living areas, to make those work a lot better from a zoning perspective. So the areas where Georgia and Greg were spending the most time were actually the most pleasant spaces to live in terms of winter, summer, and staying cool during the summertime. And also to improve the relationship between the living spaces and the outside, the garden areas, because it was on a very, very beautiful garden. But the old arrangement with the house didn't take a great deal of advantage with that, that relationship between the garden and the living, especially the living spaces of the house. So that was one of the major issues. And I guess finally, one of the challenges with this house was that it was very constrained in terms of the building envelope, and really it was difficult to physically add any area onto the footprint of the house to address any of the problems. But it could be done by the extra area we were after was added just by lifting up a second story to part of the house, and that also enabled additional north-facing windows to be used into that section. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone. Otherwise, there were energy efficiency changes made to do with the space heating, water heating. There were PV cells added for energy production, and we went as far as we could to transform the house completely to electric and remove some of the existing gas appliances. For instance, the backup to the water heating system used to be gas, and it had gas cooking. That was all changed over to electric. So yeah, I was expecting our owners to be here as well.
Sorry, your role in this, can you explain that?
Well, I was the architect for the house. Now, I was expecting Greg and Georgia to be here as well, but they, for some reason, haven't quite made the beginning. Hopefully, they might chime in sometime.
Oh, it can be tricky sometimes.
Yeah,
and how long
sometimes,
did the design phase go for you, Peter?
It took place over quite a long period of time. Greg and Georgia spent quite a deal of time just exploring what their options would be. And part of the interest with this house was just in the process of going through with them how they could get the best result for themselves. And we considered really everything, right from just selling up the site, moving to another one, trying to rebuild from scratch on the existing site. And also in the final version was to just keep as much as we could of the existing house, and all of the footprint remained as such, and just work to rezone it and make improvements thermally to make the house better.
Now, I think that's a really interesting process that you've gone through, because a lot of people have a home and they don't know what to do, whether they're whether they should buy something else and start again or rework their process. So the fact that you've worked with them as an architect through those options is really great, because the guidance is required. It's a very daunting thing sometimes to work out what you can achieve on an existing house. Yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to move on to an intro from Mark, just so we get through an introduction, and then we can take some of these questions that are lining up. So Mark from BuildHer House, would you mind? Mark O'Brien, perfect. Hi, Mark.
Hi, welcome everybody. Charming old heritage listed weatherboard dates to about 1915, so much older than the other ones you've seen. And it had almost no redeeming sustainable properties at all before we undertook a comprehensive restoration. Since we're located inside an eco-village, we've tried to do our best to make it a little more sustainable in line with all of our neighbours who've got incredible eco homes. So our major tasks, as you can imagine, with the wraparound veranda and old rooms, was to bring lots of light into the interior, add a whole heap of insulation to weather the cold winters and baking summers that we get here under our tin roof and the old weatherboard and fibro walls. To be honest, most of what we've done has been fairly low tech and would be available to anyone in a similar position. We've internally, we've remediated most of the lead paint and asbestos. We've added lots of insulation to the walls and under the floor. But it also comes down to really low tech things like just draft sausages under the doors, which are about $3.50 at Bunnings. Makes an incredible difference. We put in ceiling fans. We have still, in the end, put in ultra efficient ducted air conditioning, which we use very little. We've put in a solar tube to fix the light in the darkest kind of living room that we have. And like everyone else in our village, we've got dual reclaimed water systems to save water. And we're just about to put on our solar panels, which we got permission finally to do, even though we're a heritage listed house with the council. So that will make most of our power free. Just additionally, we're quite proud that it took a lot of time for my wife. The inside is entirely furnished and fitted out with second-hand appliances. Everything basically comes off Gumtree. There are some new lights and some of the taps are new, but honestly, all the furniture, all the appliances, all the fittings, all the curtains were second-hand. So we've really tried to recycle everything, including the kitchen that you can see in the pictures there. That was all the old kitchen, which we refitted and redressed and repainted. So what you can't see is we've rewired and replumbed everything as well, but that's probably of less interest to the panelists today.
Well, and Mark, just to answer one of the questions that's come in, did you do this yourself or did you have a design team help you?
We had a builder to do the interior work and strip the floors and so on. We did not have an architect. We knew roughly what we could do. We did have a house designer, happened to be my sister, who is a really good sort of eco home designer. She designed and built her own straw bale house. So she was fully across what you can do from an eco-sustainable point of view.
And to save the question later, I'm just going to ask for her name now.
Yeah. MKC Design.
Beautiful. Okay, so she helped you through the process of designing this. So I guess when someone asked, do you need an architect? I guess how much do you want to do on the house and what are you looking to do? There are all levels of designers, architects and people who can help you with sustainable measures, but it really depends on what you're looking to achieve as to who would be the best fit. So Mark's done it himself. Obviously, Georgia and Greg were looking for a bigger, a bigger extension and solution. So they needed to use an architect and they found Peter as that solution. Same with Dion. All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mark. And finally, our introduction to Jenny and family. Sorry, I don't have your details here on the piece of paper, but for Boathouse, which is nicknamed a lighthouse. And I'm assuming because it's so light and bright.
No, it's actually to do with the business name. So I'm Jenny Edwards from Lighthouse Architecture and Science. So I'm a building scientist and we have a team of architects. And with me, I like to think of them as family, but Benny and Fab are our wonderful clients and the people who live in the house. The main thing I want to stress about this project is that it involved no extension at all. It's a 1970s house that needed some love and attention, and a lot of Benny and Fab's friends thought they should knock it down and rebuild. But we went through quite a lot of feasibility and thinking and we agreed with Benny and Fab that it had real potential for renovation. So it's a 115 square metre house that was completely transformed. And I want to proudly say that we recently won the Green Smart, National Green Smart Renovation Award, which I brought that round to show Benny and Fab today.
Beautiful, thank you. And what were the key sustainability things you were trying to attack in the brief there, Jenny?
Improving the building envelope is the key stuff from the, the nerdier building science side for me. So that's all about insulation, good quality glazing and air tightness. But in terms of design, and this is where the credit goes to the architect, it was about making the house function and connect to its lovely surroundings, its front yard and backyard so much better. But I will let Benny and Fab maybe talk to that too, about how it's changed.
One of the main problems that we had living in the house in the original condition was that the bedrooms are all in the back of the house in a rectangle, and the living areas are in the front with a corridor dividing the whole house. And we found that quite awkward to move around and space-wise. So once it was reconfigured by the architect, we've got a very large living area which takes up almost half of the house on the left, sorry, on the right if you're facing it, and the bedrooms and the bathrooms and the laundry, which I never really walked around in any case, is probably about 25% of the size that it originally was. We just need a washing machine and a tub. And that's in the corridor on the way to the bedrooms. And the bath. Our kids are a bit big. They didn't need a bath anymore. So getting rid of that as well created a lot more space. So in a 115 square house, it feels like 127.5.
Wonderful, isn't that amazing? I did get a question here about what the budget you had to do that work is.
Did you want to?
Yeah, the build itself was about $270,000.
Yeah, 276.
276, and of course, yeah, the architect fee was separate to that.
Yeah, so I think the design fees, the total design fees from us is about $20,000. So the whole project came in under $300,000, which we like to point out to people is the house feels like an entirely new home, and it's gone from 3.3 star to 6.8 star. And it now has 3 bedrooms / 4 bedrooms, a utility, a multi-purpose room that can function as a guest room. It's got 2 bathrooms instead of 1. It's got 2 living areas. It's got a lovely study nook, and it feels significantly bigger than it felt before without extending the footprint.
Yeah, so that's an amazing use of it's an amazing use of space and also of their budget to achieve so much on really quite a finite costing. There's a lot of questions in here about specifically about insulation. As a building scientist, Jenny, do you reckon you could talk to us a little bit about insulation and what we should be looking for, especially when we're thinking about retrofitting and how easy and hard it is to do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, insulation is absolutely key to thermal performance. So starting at the ceiling, I always recommend that you need a minimum of R5, particularly in these cooler climates like Canberra, where we experience the absolute extremes. So R5 insulation in the ceiling, and that's what we've done here. We've topped up, but most importantly, no gaps. You know, you've got to make sure it's thorough, because just 5% gaps equates to a 50% loss in effectiveness if you're talking about R5 gaps. So insulate that ceiling really well. Have as few penetrations through the ceiling as possible so the insulation is intact and there's very little air leakage. And then you can retrofit insulation to the external walls of a lot of existing houses, even without pulling the plasterboard off. So there are quite a few pump-in options these days, or in a major reconfiguration like this, most of the lining came down, so we did put bats in. And then subfloor, I always encourage people in our climate to get R2 insulation underneath suspended timber floors. And we often use polyester bats there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I know we've also had a few questions come in for various different people in here. And we've also had Greg come in. Welcome, Greg. So Greg was working with Peter and on Georgia and Greg's house. Do you want to give us a little bit of a quick overview about your favourite part of the renovation or the solution that Peter's come up with there?
Wow, there are a lot of favourite parts, I'd say. The really, really obvious one is the constancy of the temperature and the comfort of the house internally, absolutely regardless of what's going on outside. So this morning, I don't know what the temperature was when we got up, but it was 20 inside the house, upstairs and downstairs. It's still 20. I think it's been up to all of 24 and it's been down to all of 17. I'm talking about the middle of the night, the middle of the day, whatever. So there's this extraordinary evenness of comfortable temperature all the way through. The light would be the other big thing. We've got much more window area than we had before. And I guess...
Are you using solely passive heat and cooling? Or have you
we've got a wood heater, which we have used at night, and it's nice to have there as a sort of a visible source of heat. Drying off wet clothing, that sort of thing. We've got underfloor heating. We've actually got a lot of sources of heating if we want to use them. But what we're finding is that the energy input required to operate all of those is much less. The wood heater is much more, vastly more efficient than one we had before. The underfloor heating that we had before, which mostly disappeared out some single glazed, large north-facing windows at night. That's now a more efficient unit that's not in the slab, it's just underneath the tiles.
Okay.
More of the heat, and the heat is retained by virtue of a very carefully done conversion of those same cedar windows, the nice cedar windows that we like very much, which I can probably sort of show you if I move around here. Been retrofitted to be double glazed. Very nice job on the woodwork. The lighting is a bit hard in here at the moment to be able to see clearly, but it's a beautiful job. The windows look exactly the same, but they're now double glazed. The other thing would be the space usage. We now have a gigantic kitchen in the background here, almost embarrassingly large, whereas the previous kitchen was quite tiny and compact and unexpandable. So we swapped the lounge room and the kitchen.
And how long did you live in the house prior to these works going on, Greg?
I bought the house in 1978. So we've done a few small alterations to it, which were done by builders with sort of our own input in terms of design, and just draftsmen sort of turning those ideas into something coherent. So this is the first time we've had something done properly by an architect, and it makes a huge difference.
I guess because you've all lived in the house, I think most of you have lived in the houses prior to the renovation. Could I open it up to the difference in the energy consumption prior and post all these sustainable measures? Maybe Greg, you're still talking. If you can talk to that quickly, maybe Dion.
Yep. Okay. Well, I've mentioned the wood heater, which was nothing to do with the fundamental design. The underfloor heating has been made much more efficient, and that's a very, I think, an enormously efficient thing, because the heat comes in from underneath. Yep. So the only place it can go is into the room. Mm-hmm. So that's an efficient way to use electricity. We're about to fit solar panels, which will hopefully radically improve the overall consumption. So the house is wired up for panels as part of the building process. We couldn't afford to put them in immediately on the end of the build, but they're going in, imminently.
That's lovely. I think that journey of being able to improve things as you can afford, or it becomes a priority, is really important. So people don't have to feel the pressure of, I guess, tackling everything straight away, but allowing provision for it so you can fit it off later. Maybe Dion and Amy, have you seen a massive change in your energy consumption?
So the energy consumption for us shifted from gas to electric as we got rid of the, we still retained a couple of gas heaters, but we switched our hot water and our cooktop across to electric. So they sort of shifted across. So the spend was probably sort of the same, but then we got solar installed in April. So now that we get to offset what has been converted to electric is now on solar. So our heat pump is set to kick in at 8 in the morning at the moment. And then I'm working from home. So, all our washing, as much cooking and so forth, dishwasher all goes on during the day. So now we're really starting to see the bills come down because of that. And like what Greg was saying, you sort of get to the end of the build, and we couldn't afford solar at the time, so we let that a bit till later. And we knew having ceiling fans was good enough for summer, and then the gas was okay for winter, so we didn't have a pressing need to install any new forms of active heating or cooling. But now with the solar, it'd be good to see if we did get a some sort of split system to replace the gas, and then just run that. Just to make use of that electric, the surplus we're getting from the panels as well for heating in the winter. But yeah, it's a bit of a longer process. It's not something that you don't try to knock it all off in one go. You can do some things later.
Yeah, it's really nice to follow that process though. I think and I think it's nice to have that realistic expectation. Like, you've afforded a beautiful renovation and to be able to tackle a lot of things, but it is an ongoing journey. So that's perfect. Yeah, sorry, go on, Dan.
So someone had a question in there in terms of the PCMs. They asked specifically in terms of that being cost effective. So we didn't really know much about PCMs until phase change materials until Andy brought it up with us. We just assumed they'd specify a polished concrete slab, and they said, no, based on your budget, you've got a champagne taste on a beer budget. So they said, look, we'll maintain the suspended timber floor, and by putting the PCMs in, we'll get a similar benefit to what you get from a polished concrete floor, but it'll be at a fraction of the cost. So I think they said, look, to do that polished concrete floor in the new part of the house would have been $10,000 or something like that, whereas the PCMs was about $3,000.
Do you want to explain for people who haven't heard about PCMs how that works and exactly what the materials are that they use there?
It's best to describe, if anyone is familiar with say like coconut oil that goes rock hard when it's cold and it's opaque. So the PCMs they put in was almost like a big blister pack, like an oversized packet of aspirins or something like that, where each PCM was the size of a hockey puck. And what they did with the floor was they added some extra battens under the floor to be able to lay those PCMs down, and then put the flooring over the top, so they're sort of hidden away under the floor. Their common use is more in the walls and in ceilings, but Andy he recommended we put it in the floor as well, which is what we did. So we didn't put it in the walls or ceiling. So on a cold but clear winter's day, as the sun comes in and lands on those floorboards, the PCMs phase change material will absorb that heat and turn that hard white substance into a liquid. And then later, as the sun moves around, it'll start to let that heat back out. So,
so for those that missed it, PCMs, phase change materials, and is there a way to calculate what area of PCMs you need compared to your room size?
So Andy did that based on maximising the amount of light that we would have coming in. So pretty much anywhere the light landed, he put the PCMs in.
It needs to be where the light hits it, otherwise it's useless, it doesn't work. So it really needs a direct light heat onto that.
Beautiful. And do you, sorry, I'm just asking the questions as they come in. Do you have any resources that people could use on PCMs, or know of where they could find out more?
So the brand was called BioPCM, BioPCM. And then if you look on their website, they've got technical data sheets where you can have a look at the information. So that's what I did when Andy specified it, and I had to read up and had a look, and there's some testimonials in there. And so we knew that we were sort of a bit of an early adopter for this sort of technology. Not many people have used it. It was $3,000 to install. So some people might look at that and say, oh no, I'll just spend that money on active heating or something else. But we were just happy to give it a try.
Yeah, and it is about, there's a question in there, and I guess I think we'll go to Mark from Bellbird House for this. How did you make the decisions on what you were going to tackle within your budget? Obviously, recycling was really high up on your priority, so reusing things. How did you tackle your budget in terms of other sustainable things you put into the house?
Well, with any retrofit of a really old property, you do need luck on your side, because every time you remove a panel or a floorboard, you don't really know what you're going to find. That said, somebody else mentioned that they'd been able to live in the property for a while before they really worked out what they were going to do. And although we weren't living here, we were able to stay here regularly for about a year or so before we started. So that gave us a really good idea of what the seasons were like here, what the conditions were actually like inside the home, and that probably set our priorities. How do we set the budget? I honestly don't know. We had a very ambitious budget, which made everyone laugh, but we did stick to it.
What was your budget?
Look, we basically rewired the house, replumbed the house, stripped all the floors. It was just under 200,000.
Wow.
So some people would say that's a lot, but it's quite a big home. We've had to entirely replace the deck. I mean, that's $60,000 of hardwood and labour right there. So
building costs money.
Yes. So we have had some small council grants, because we're heritage listed. We're heritage listed by the council, not the state. So we have a little bit more leeway, but yep. They've contributed about $30,000 over 3 years towards the deck, which we had to replace.
Great.
So we were on a very tight budget because we had a lot to do. How much of that was the insulation? I'm not sure. The walls, very cheap to do, I thought. $7,000 for the external, for the insul block stuff we put in. The roof was already insulated, but we had to completely do the underfloor insulation.
So specifically, what did you do to insulate your walls? Did you remove the plaster lining and then insulate? How did you retrofit that?
normally you try and do it from the outside.
Whoa.
Oh, we've frozen. That's okay. I'm going to assume it's frozen for everyone. And we have had a couple of other questions.
Outside, but we've got asbestos panels, lovely fibre on the outside, which no one will go.
Frozen again.
I'm so sorry, you're breaking up. I'm just going to move on, but I'm going to assume you were saying because of the asbestos on the external, you had to go from internal. Is that correct?
Yes, can you hear me? Is that working for you?
Now it can work. Yep.
Right, I'm not going to move. Yes, they can do it internally without removing all of your plasterboard, which was old and had ash veneer, which no one wanted to remove.
Mm-hmm.
So they cut holes in between every stud, up near the ceiling, and literally pump in recycled polystyrene blocks. It looks like feta cheese cubes, really. And then they just plug the hole and repair the hole. And it took 1 day to do the whole house. They check it all with thermal imaging afterwards to see if there's any gaps that they missed. I've seen them, just been replying. There seems to be lots of questions about it on the question and answer bit.
Yeah, thank you.
But they can see if they've missed anything and they can go back and do it. And it is better to chase wiring in before you do it, but it's not impossible to chase wiring and pipes in after you've done it as well.
Beautiful, thank you. I think we've only got time for 2 more. So I had a question about the master planning process, whether you can work with people, and I'm going to hand this over to Peter, on a gradual process and implement in phases, whether you suggest doing that or whether people have to kind of tackle everything all together.
I think that's a very good way to proceed because once you're at the beginning of a design process, you can take that as far as as far as you can think. Really, it's easy to do on a blank sheet of paper. Comparatively speaking, it doesn't cost very much. So you can master plan to your heart's content and try and resolve, even fairly well problems that may be in something like the medium to even distant future. What that means, of course, is that when it comes to dealing with them, a lot of the thinking will have already been done, which will facilitate coming to grips with the building processes at that point in time. So apart from anything else, it's a cheap way to proceed in a retrofit situation, because you are coming up with the answers ahead of time. That then allows you to plan for them and do things in the earlier stages which won't interfere with other measures that will happen subsequently.
Yeah, and so you can plan for them in both a cost and a physical nature in terms of the works. And I guess you can revise that plans, in terms, if you're saying it's a cheap way, you can revise that master plan as many times as you like to come up with an ideal solution that suits your budget at that time. Flexible
planning, always the way to go. You never try you shouldn't be locking yourself into a particular course of action. Things will actually be modified as you go through each phase. Things might change with each phase. Maybe Greg's got some comments he might like to add to that.
I might. Sorry, we've got only a few more minutes, and I just had one more question, and I'm going to direct this to Jenny, if that's all right. Just in terms of the first steps in terms of proceeding with sustainable measures, what would be the first things that you would undertake if you wanted to, I guess, put something in place in a house that's existing?
If you weren't looking at changing the design or reconfiguring things, if you're looking to do that, I would say you need an architect or a building designer. But if you're talking about the building science, it's really the unsexy stuff. It's draft sealing. Number one is your biggest bang for buck. And then insulation. So make that building envelope nice and airtight and well insulated really is the simplest thing. And that's what I encourage everyone. You really can improve your levels of comfort and reduce your energy consumption by doing that. Even in rental houses, there are some simple tricks to improving the performance by looking at airtightness in particular.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. And I know we could keep going for a really long time, but we've been given the wrap up. So I want to encourage you all to learn a little bit more about the houses. There's links in the chat section there. You can go in and ask questions specifically. So for all those people that have asked questions, and I know there's a whole heap of you, so I'm really sorry, you can go and direct those questions directly to the homeowners, and there's no pressure on them. They may or may not be able to respond, but hopefully they'll be able to get to some of your answers. I also wanted to say that whilst this has been a free service that Sustainable House Day has put on, there's a donate button up there as well. If you can donate towards them putting on more events like this where we can all learn from each other. And thank you so much for coming and submitting your houses, everyone, and also for having us and putting on an amazing day. So thank you so much.